Welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing the most important news story going on the planet right now. This absolutely should be starting off every newscast of every hour on every station in the land. Yeah, whatever they're talking about on TV, whatever they're talking about on your Facebook timeline that is not climate change related is actually not as important as the fact that we are heading face first into extinction sooner than most people think. And that is some heavy news and unfortunate news, and probably news that might make people say, no way, come on, man. It's not that bad. Are you kidding me? This crazy talk. No, it's not. It's actually, the crazy talk is that everything is fine and we'll be okay and we're going to pull out of this in time. So yes, that's what this channel is about, is alerting you to this very grim and dire fact. And, you know, if you're new to this channel, pull up a seat, you know, hang out for a while, sit a spell, take in a couple of videos, and, you know, feel free to engage in discussion in the comment section below, where very, very knowledgeable people hang out. I'm going to start reading some articles. I have a bunch of stuff, plethora, a deluge of articles to read, but a lot of them are kind of short, so I think that I can get through most, if not all of these. Starting with, this is from investors.com. Why hasn't the California heat wave sparked the usual global warming hysteria? This week, this is from yesterday. And who wrote this article? Let's find out if we can find out. I don't know what it says. It doesn't say. Anyways, environmentalism this week. The Southwest was hit with an earth-scorching heat wave with temperatures well above 100 degrees in some areas. Thermometer on my phone says 92, but I'm letting you know right now it's at least 100 here. Feeling like 100, if not more, with temperatures well above 100 in some areas. Normally that would cause every news organization to trot out global warming is killing us stories, but not this time. Maybe they've caught on to the fact that the public has tuned out. It wasn't long ago when the mainstream press took every opportunity, no matter how weak the connection, to blame bad things on global warming. So far, at least, we haven't found one major story using the heat wave gripping the Southwest to sound the alarm about global warming. This lack of alarmism has not gone unnoticed. Writing at the New Republic this week, Emily Atkin complained that despite record-breaking heat and a wildfire season, she says, is already worse than usual, there is no climate connection to be found in much news coverage, even in historically climate-conscious outlets like NPR and the New York Times. When Atkin contacted NPR for an explanation, the network's science editor said, "You don't just want to be throwing around, this is due to climate change, that is due to climate change." Wow. Also this week, Chris Hayes of the uber liberal MSNBC, are they uber liberal, responded to a complaint on Twitter that his network wasn't clanging the global warming alarm bells loudly enough or regularly enough with this tweet. Every time we've covered it's been a palpable, every time we've covered it, it's been a palpable ratings killer. So the incentives are not that great. Yeah, indeed, nobody wants to hear about climate change, especially if it's really, really bad. So why the sudden outburst of common sense among the mainstream press? Perhaps they've come to the realization that after decades of end-of-the-world predictions and oversaturation coverage, during which time global temperatures have barely budged, the public has stopped paying attention. You can only predict the end of the world so many times, after all, before people start to get skeptical. The attempts by scientists and environmental activists to blame everything on global warming has probably increased public skepticism as well. Case in point is a video running on the Weather Channel app about a study that claims to have found a link between suicides and climate change. Even an uninformed public will start to question the validity of these wild claims. Are they wild? The public may also have noticed that the most vocal preachers of climate change doom, Al Gore and Leonardo DiCaprio, etc., don't act like there's any crisis whatsoever. They still own huge energy-sucking mansions and party on massive gas-guzzling yachts. Thanks, Leonardo. They aren't the only global warming hypocrites. A survey earlier this year by researchers at the University of Michigan and Cornell University found that those who said they were highly concerned about global warming were the least likely to take individual action. Okay, that's very interesting. That's extremely interesting. Skeptics were more likely to do the things the alarmists demand. Interesting. Recycle, use public transportation, and so forth. That is a very interesting survey or study. Wow. Okay. How big a crisis can climate change? So you have people who are like, yes, I'm concerned about this problem. I'm so concerned about it. But they're not. They're just like turning around and just doing whatever. They're barely doing anything, which goes to show you that just saying things and just talking about things makes everybody feel, so much better, even if nothing is happening. Hint, hint, Democrats. Hint, hint, liberals. I mean, we already know the Republicans don't care. They aren't the only global warming. Oh, we already read that. How big a crisis can climate change be if those who scream the loudest about it can't be bothered to change their own behavior? Whatever the cause of climate ennui, it's clear that years of proselytizing about the existential threat posed by a warmer planet has failed to win many converts. In fact, a recent Gallup survey asked people to name the most important problems facing the country today. Neither climate change nor global warming even showed up on the list of more than 45 items. Just 2% named environment/pollution. We'd say the public has it right, but don't be surprised if the media returns to its climate change obsession, if only to take a break from its Trump obsession. Good article, and I read something kind of on this topic a few weeks or months ago about people, burning out on the subject of climate change. I mean, clearly it's not a popular subject, climate change channels, on YouTube, don't have a lot of viewers, don't have a lot of followers. They're not, they're not mega. You really don't have channels with there's no climate change channels with 100,000 subscribers, but there's plenty, thousands upon thousands of YouTube channels talking about politics or QAnon or, whatever else, conspiracy, this or that have, 100,000, 150,000, 200,000 subscribers. And then you get, other news channels which have millions of subscribers. But climate change is at the very bottom of the pack as far as viewership and interest. And that is very, very unfortunate because the bigger channels aren't talking about climate change, if only in passing, right? The political channels that know that climate change is real are like, look at all these problems. We have, intrigue, political intrigue and Trump and all this stuff. And climate change, and then walk on by and keep talking about something else. Don't forget climate change. Oh yeah. And then just keep on going. None of them actually, not many stop and just take a long, deep dive into climate change and how bad it is. I'm not saying all. There are some that try, the RTs and the Real Talks, and even, somebody said CNN did a deep study on it, or half hour. We call that deep in this day and age. But how interesting that as soon, at the moment the climate change becomes an actual existential threat. The moment that climate change ramps up to the point where people are going to start dying is the point at which people care the least. That is frightening. And I think actually probably also part of the reason why people aren't talking about it or aren't really looking at it, because there are a lot of people that understand how bad it is, that understand that this is a breaking point, and they are sticking their heads in the sand as far as they possibly can, because see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Let's see. Moving on. Another frightening story, and possibly a driver of more mass migration towards the United States from South America or Central America. Drought has wiped out 130 million pounds of corn in El Salvador. The title was worded 130 million pounds. This is from Yesenia Fuentes from yesterday. The tiny Central American country of El Salvador's Civil Protection Agency has issued a red alert as of Tuesday. The culprit, drought. More than 77,000 corn farmers have been afflicted by the drought that's been ongoing for a month, according to the government. The Directorate of Civil Protection, Jorge Melendez, said Tuesday that more than 130 million pounds of corn were lost, reports Reuters. Officials are still investigating whether other crops like coffee have been affected too. 29 days of no rain triggers the red alert, which has been issued in 143 of the country's 262 municipalities. Issuing the alert will allow the government to bring farmers the financial aid and seeds they need to begin planting again. Corn is a staple in El Salvador. You'll find it in drinks like atole and in the dough used to make tortillas and tamales. Rows of corn plants can be found throughout the country everywhere you go, but especially in the east where most of the country's grains grow. The drought hit this part of the country particularly hard, per the Associated Press, with temperatures setting heat records in recent days. Record-breaking heat is becoming an all too common phenomenon these days due to climate change. So is drought. We know climate change is projected to intensify drought periods in certain regions of the world, and Central America is one of them. Unless farmers get help adapting, you best believe agriculture will suffer. El Salvador declared a drought emergency for the first time on record in 2016 when waters reached critically low levels. The country is particularly vulnerable to climate change because much of its cropland is uninsured, requires rain, and is at risk of soil degradation, according to the World Bank. Oxfam International touts organic farming and gardening as the solution, but it's unclear if that will be enough to deal with the massive shift climate change could bring. Many of the immigrants currently leaving Latin America for the U.S. come from El Salvador. It's no wonder people leave given the mass inequality the country faces, as well as the increased threat climate change poses to its indigenous and rural people, as the World Bank notes. Civil war drove my parents to leave their beloved El Salvador in the 1980s. Climate change might just be the next big push. And I would say that most countries, I'm sure, are aware that there is going to be some mass migration going on everywhere on this planet in the next 5 to 10 years. This is from Counterpunch. Methane Deathtrap threatens democracy. This is from yesterday. A methane death trap, continuing Arctic Ocean eruption of ever-increasing levels of methane brings forth speculation of a black swan event, meaning society is caught flat-footed, oblivious to impending danger until it's way too late. Along those lines, The Economist, a newspaper, only recently highlighted the methane issue for its mainstream readership. The methane mystery. Scientists struggle to explain a worrying rise in atmospheric methane. The Economist, April 28, 2018. Keeping methane in check is therefore critical if a rise in temperature this century is to remain well below 2°C relative to pre-industrial times, a goal set out in the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015. The explanations put forward by scientists range from the troubling to the truly hair-raising. Hair raising equals 100% correct. Climate scientists have long cited methane bubbles rising to the surface in the Arctic for well over 1 decade now, especially along the East Siberian Arctic Shelf. Problem: methane eruptions are gradually turning into virtual monsters, getting bigger and wider, up to a half-mile across of rippling bubbles, according to the Russian scientists, and potentially more dangerous and destructive, expanding more and more in anticipation of a gigantic CH4 burp, maybe 50 gigatons suddenly versus only 5 gigatons now in the atmosphere, followed by a massive global self-reinforcing planetary heat stroke. At that point in time, the Economist's methane mystery reference will be solved via the full Monty as CH4 takes a selfie in the form of a 50 gigaton burst. Not pretty. Unquestionably, methane could be a significant disruption to commonly accepted democratic and autocratic, but especially democratic lifestyles, as well as one of the least understood threats in all of history, a dreaded black swan event, or in essence, a virtual death trap. Meantime, mainstream science is behind the 8 ball regarding Arctic methane. According to an article in the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change claims Arctic methane will be insignificant throughout the century, as stated. The IPCC considers the potential contribution of the ESAS into the emissions of CH4 as insignificant. This is from Russian scientists deny climate model of IPCC. What if the IPCC is dead wrong, thus misleading the public headfirst into a black swan event, blindsided by one of the biggest potential human disasters in all history, maybe sooner rather than later, all of which begs a multi-part question. How can scientists in a worldwide forum like the IPCC be so far off base? Or is today's scientific methodology inherently weak? Or is the entire climate change scenario simply too vast for effective scientific coverage? Or is the ESAS methane threat not that imposing? Nobody knows for sure. Yet, Russian data on seabed methane concludes that the East Siberian Arctic Shelf shows the roof of the subsea permafrost had already reached the depth of hydrate stability, the destruction of which may cause massive releases of bubble methane. So, in plain English, methane hydrates are so close to disruptive instability that not much additional global warming is required to totally destabilize the methane clathrates, thus potentially releasing enormous quantities of methane, as happy, smiling Americans unknowingly sleep in their beds, assuming NASA, NSA, TSA, and the Pentagon will secure their lives. Au contraire, no chance. Here's the critical issue. World leaders other than in America depend on IPCC data to adhere to Paris's 2015 calling for voluntary countrywide limitations on carbon emissions to hold global warming below the dreaded 2C figure. Voluntary? Really? Yes. Oh well. In that regard, it is possible that ESAS methane could crank up temps beyond 2C dangerously fast in spite of far-reaching voluntary limitations. Answer: yes. Very likely and probable. That was a question. Very likely and probable, according to some climate scientists, resulting in the biggest black swan event, or BSE, of all time, and likely by default the biggest democracy-smashing BSE ever. Far and away, the problem is much larger than realized because, according to Arctic News, methane erupting from Arctic Ocean seafloor, March 13, 2017, the amount of methane eruptions are often missed, yes, missed, not recorded by measurement stations at the stations, as the stations are land-based and measurements are taken at low altitude. By the time CH4 erupting in the Arctic Ocean reaches the land stations, it has risen to higher altitudes. Thus, nobody has a good handle on the problem. But what is known for sure is not comforting. The world's leading authority in Arctic methane is Natalia Shkova, head of the International Arctic Research Center, University of Alaska Fairbanks. Her marine expeditions into East Siberian Arctic Sea region convinced her of a major risk of a large-scale methane burp anytime now, which could result in extraordinarily rapid global warming, potentially burning off agricultural areas, especially in mid-latitudes. In turn, the massive numbers of eco-migrants fleeing throughout the equatorial latitudes would increase fairly dramatically, thus fueling more and more extremist nationalism, bloody raw patriotism, and ethnicity bashing by white supremacists and nationalists as warring factions fight over food and water, bringing on the final thrust of a dagger into the heart of democracy as fascism wins, proudly standing side by side with abrupt climate change. As for a reality check, climate change is already forcing eco-migration in parts of Asia and throughout the eastern southern Mediterranean region. It's already started fueling fascism. This is happening. And indeed, this is, anything can be a trigger for, a black swan event, economic collapse, some kind of natural disaster that, that upends life as we know it in a certain region of the world or a country. All of these things are very, very likely and getting likelier. I'm going to link a video from the Irish Times. It's actually a video in a page about, the title is Recent Climate Extremes Indicate a Global Climate Emergency on the Horizon. Check that out. It's very short and informative. Although it's a video by Emeritus Professor of Geography in Maynooth University, John Sweeney. At the end of the video, he's, basically saying, we got to do something real fast. Real fast. Next up on this article reading marathon. Climate change crushing infrastructure across planet. This is from July 24th. Keith Schneider, who I interviewed last year, has just returned from another swing through Southeast Asia. I'll be talking to him next week. His observations above are on the mark for today's news. So there's a video also on this page as well, but I'm going to read the text. There's some text going along with it. Hundreds of people are missing and an unknown number dead after a dam under construction collapsed in southeast Laos. State media reported the collapse of the hydroelectric dam in Attapeu province late on Monday sent flash floods through 6 villages, Lao news agency said. More than 6,600 people have been made homeless, it added. Pictures showed villagers stranded on roofs and submerged house and boats carrying people to safety. The disaster has claimed several human lives and left hundreds of people missing, the agency reported. Construction of the Z Namnoi Dam began in 2013. It was due to begin commercial operations next year. The main Thai stakeholder in the project, Ratchaburi Electricity Generating Holding, said it had received a report from the dam's operator that a saddle dam measuring 770 meters long and 16 meters high had collapsed. It said continuous rainstorms had led a high volume of water to flow into the reservoir. Currently, ZPN and Z Namnoi Power Company Limited and related agencies have evacuated the people who reside around the area, the statement said. All right, so I'm going to link that also and move on to the next article from the Washington Post. This is from July 24. Death toll climbs as Japan wilts under a record-breaking heat wave. As heat hits Japan, cooling tech goes on display. As deadly heat hit Japan in July, a trade fair in Tokyo offered some prospects for relief, like industrial-strength mist sprayers. Less than 2 weeks after torrential rains wreaked destruction across Japan, the country is facing yet another weather-related crisis. A record-breaking heat wave that forecasters say could last until early August. More than 30,000 people have been admitted to the hospital for heat stroke, and at least 30,000 people. At least 77 deaths have been registered in the past 2 weeks, including a 6-year-old boy in Aichi Prefecture who died July 17th after a school excursion, Kyoto News reported. Government agencies have warned that the country's 35 million senior citizens are particularly vulnerable to the heat. At least 80% of the deaths have been among those aged 65 and above, a researcher told Reuters. The heat is a threat to life, a spokesman for Japan's meteorological agency said in a news conference Monday. We recognize it as a natural disaster. A spokesman for the agency told the BBC that many areas of the country have experienced unprecedented levels of heat. In the city of Kumagaya, 40 miles from Tokyo, temperatures rose to 106 degrees Fahrenheit, about 41 degrees Celsius on Monday, the highest recorded in Japan. In Tokyo, home to more than 9 million people, temperatures topping 104 degrees were reported for the first time. In the past week, schools across Japan have canceled outdoor and sporting events, CNN reported, including parts of the famous Gion Matsuri festival that runs in Kyoto each July. Air conditioning is relatively rare in Japan, where years of government-led environmental campaigns have encouraged residents and organizations to reduce their reliance on cooling technology. According to CNN, a 2017 government survey found fewer than 45% of state-run elementary and middle schools had air conditioning, and most apartment buildings did not have centralized climate control systems. To cool off, many people in Tokyo have started bringing small fans with them as they walk through the streets. Other heat-combating devices were put on display on Thursday at a trade fair in the city, including industrial-strength mist sprayers and a jacket with built-in fans. Japan's heat wave has also renewed concerns about the country's ability to host the next Summer Olympics, which are scheduled for July and August in 2020. Earlier this month, a representative of the International Olympic Committee said steps were being taken to minimize the impact of Japan's summer heat on the games. The Wall Street Journal reported announcements have already been made that some outdoor events, such as the marathon, will be held at earlier hours than usual to avoid the heat. Actually, might have time for one more. I think this is a bit longer article possibly. No, maybe not. Orcas of the Pacific Northwest are starving and disappearing. This is from the New York Times, July 9th, 2018. For the last 3 years, not one calf has been born in the dwindling pods of black and white killer whales spouting geysers of mist off the coast of the Pacific Northwest. Oh, I think I'm missing some of this article. Excuse me. See if I can get this whole thing. I'm not going to read the whole thing probably, but this article actually also goes along with another article I wanted to read about killer whales stalking fishing vessels and basically stealing fish out of the nets of fishing vessels. But that was actually a few years old. So now here we are. This is where we are with the orca population today. Not one calf has been born to the dwindling pods of black and white killer whales spouting geysers of mist off the coast of the Pacific Northwest. Normally, 4 or 5 calves would be born each year among this fairly unusual urban population of whales, pods named J, K, and L. But most recently, the number of orcas here has dwindled to just 75, a 30-year low in what seems to be an inexorable, perplexing decline. Listed as endangered since 2005, the orcas are essentially starving as their primary prey, the Chinook or king salmon, are dying off. Just last month, another one of the southern resident killer whales, one nicknamed Cruiser, that hadn't been seen since last November, was presumed dead by the Center for Whale Research. In March, this article is all over the place. Too much. Hold on. Article disappeared and waiting for it to come back. No? Almost. Maybe. Come on. You can do it. All right, let's see if this article cooperates. In March, Governor Jay Inslee issued an executive order directing state agencies to do more to protect the whales. And in May, he convened the Southern Resident Orca Task Force, a group of state, tribal, provincial, and federal officials to devise ways to stem the loss of the beloved regional creature. I believe we have orcas in our soul in this state, he said. At another point, he wrote of the whales and Chinook salmon that the impacts of letting these two species disappear would be felt for generations, if there are indeed any generations, or many to come. The orcas are also facing a new threat. The recent agreement between the Canadian government and the Kinder Morgan to expand the Trans Mountain Pipeline would multiply oil tanker traffic through the orcas' habitat by 7 times. Again, we have orcas in our soul, Governor Jay Inslee says, while multiplying oil tanker traffic hits the area. Multiply oil tanker traffic through the orcas' habitat by 7 times, according to some estimates, and expose them to excessive noise and potential spills. Construction is set to begin in August, despite opposition from Governor Inslee and many environmentalists. Okay, well, they're opposing it, so I guess that's good. But, they're opposing it, but it's going on. In the late 1990s, there were nearly 100 of these giant whales in the population. Following the salmon, they migrate in the Salish Sea to the northern coast of the British Columbia and often surface in the south at Puget Sound, within sight of downtown Seattle, especially during the spring and summer months. The males, which can weigh up to 22,000 pounds, typically live about 30 years, and females up to 16,000 pounds survive longer, up to 50 or 60 years, although one J-pod member, Granny, lived to be 105 years old. Not only are there fewer calves in the recent years, but signs of inbreeding also point to a weakening population. In the 1970s and 80s, theme parks like SeaWorld captured nearly 4 dozen orcas from the region, possibly shrinking the pod's gene pool, possibly. In the last 3 decades, just 2 males fathered half the calves in the last 3 decades, and only a third of the females are breeding, just once every decade instead of every 5 years. Researchers worry that reproducing females are aging out of the population and won't be replaced. Some conservationists are concerned that the orca's decline is another sign of marine ecosystem in collapse. Beginning in 2013, something known as the blob, a gigantic mass of nutrient-poor, extremely warm water, warmed the Pacific from Mexico to Alaska as much as 6 degrees above normal. Several years ago, starfish succumbed to a wasting disease and vanished from tide pools. Much is still unknown about the plight of these orcas, but biologists and conservation managers have zeroed in on several main factors, and they are all connected. The biggest contributing factor may be the disappearance of big king salmon, fish more than 40 inches long. They are Chinook salmon specialists, said Brad Hansen, team leader for the research at the Northwest Fisheries Science Center here, part of NOAA. If they could, they would eat Chinook salmon 24/7. Orcas gobble 30 a day. Hunting enough smaller prey requires a lot more energy. The underwater world in the region is also getting noisier, especially in an area between the San Juan Islands and Vancouver Island called Harrow Strait. It is one of the orcas' favorite foraging grounds in the summer. It is also essentially a big rock ditch where sound bounces off. When you add in commercial vessel traffic going to Vancouver, recreational boaters, and whale watching operations, it's a pretty noisy place, Mr. Hansen said. Researchers are studying noise there now. They believe the cacophony of ship traffic interferes with echolocation and makes it harder for the whales to locate their prey and to communicate prey location among themselves. It can also cause hearing loss. In recent years, officials have expanded the distance which vessels, including whale watching boats and kayaks, must keep from the whales, and there is a voluntary no-go zone near the San Juan Islands. Just the presence of boats can cause the whales to spend less time feeding, said Lynn Barr of NOAA Fisheries, recovery coordinator for the Orcas, and it's harder to communicate. They have to call longer and louder when boats are nearby. Another factor is the pollution in Puget Sound. Whales that live off the coast of Seattle, Tacoma, and other cities are effectively urban whales, buffeted by municipal and industrial waste and the occasional spillage from wastewater treatment plants into the ocean. Killer whales carry some of the highest levels of pollution of any marine animal. Of the most concern are the lingering effects of chemicals and pesticides, including the now banned DDT, as well as PCBs and PBDE, widely used in flame retardants and found throughout the world. The pollutants accumulate in salmon as they feed, and when the whales eat salmon, they also ingest PCBs at even higher levels. It's very lipophilic, which means it stays in the fat, lipophilic, and the females transfer a huge proportion of the contaminant burden to their offspring. Dr. Hansen said about 85% gets transferred to calves through lactation. Yuck. And while much of the pollution is from the region's industrial past, Boeing disclosed this spring that over the past 5 years, it had discharged highly toxic PCBs into the Duwamish River, which flows into Puget Sound, thousands of times over the legal limit. Because of course they did. These toxins suppress the whale's immune systems, making them more susceptible to disease. They can also impede reproduction. That may be why tests show a high number of females who have become pregnant have failed to calve. That's all I'm going to read of this article. I think you guys get the idea. I'm going to link it below, and you can read the rest of it if you are inclined to. I'm glad you all enjoyed the interview with Kevin Hester yesterday, as much as I did. Kevin is a good guy with his finger on the pulse of abrupt climate change and what is going on around the world, and just good that we have voices like his out there adding to the discussion and adding to the awareness of this problem. So yeah, I'm glad you guys dug it. That's all I have for today. If you'd like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. And what I forgot to say in my last video was thank you for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. Until next time, peace.